El Chapo's daily life inside ADX Florence. The prison sits in the quiet emptiness of southern Colorado, surrounded by miles of dry land and silence. No towering walls. No dramatic fortress gates. Just low concrete buildings. But inside those walls is one of the most controlled environments on Earth. A place designed not just to imprison men, but to erase them from the world. The prison is called ADX Florence, the Administrative Maximum Facility. And among the men once held inside its silent concrete cells was one of the most powerful drug traffickers in modern history. Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán. For decades he ran a criminal empire worth billions. His orders moved drugs across continents. His enemies disappeared without a trace. But inside ADX Florence, power disappears. Inside this prison, every day follows the same brutal rhythm. The question is not how long a sentence lasts. The question is whether a person can survive the silence. And El Chapo's daily life here is nothing like the world he once controlled. But what happens behind those steel doors is even more unsettling than most people imagine.
Before we dive into today's powerful story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more gripping tales. Your support helps us keep sharing these stories, and we wouldn't want you to miss any of the action. Now, let's get started.
The morning inside ADX Florence begins long before the sun touches the Colorado mountains. At around 5 in the morning, the prison wakes up. Not with noise, but with movement. Guards walk through sterile hallways lined with thick concrete walls. Cameras track every angle. Motion sensors monitor each door. The cells are silent. Inside one of them, Joaquín Guzmán begins another day that looks almost identical to the one before. There are no alarms. No loud prison bells. Instead, fluorescent lights flicker on automatically. The cell is small, roughly 7 feet by 12. Concrete bed. Concrete desk. Concrete stool. Even the shower is built into the cell. Everything is designed to prevent escape. But more than that, it is designed to remove comfort. In this room, there are no soft edges. And the man once known as the most powerful drug lord in Mexico wakes up in complete isolation. For a man who once commanded armies of traffickers, the first reality of life here is simple. He is alone. But the isolation is only the beginning. Because the rules inside ADX Florence are unlike those in almost any other prison in the United States. And breaking them can make life even more difficult. Inside the cell, every object serves a specific purpose. Nothing is decorative. Nothing is unnecessary. The window is a narrow slit, angled in a way that prevents prisoners from seeing the surrounding landscape. Instead of a view, they see only sky. This design is intentional. It removes orientation. Days begin to blend together. Inside the cell is a small television mounted behind thick plastic. The channels are limited. Educational programming. Religious broadcasts. Occasionally documentaries. The volume cannot be raised very high. Every aspect of life here is regulated. Meals arrive through a slot in the door. Breakfast usually arrives shortly after 6 in the morning. A tray slides through the opening. No conversation. No eye contact. Just food and the quiet sound of metal scraping against metal. For someone like El Chapo, the contrast with his former life is almost impossible to overstate. Outside prison, he lived in mansions guarded by armed men. He escaped from high-security prisons twice. Once through a tunnel dug directly beneath his cell. But here, the design makes escape almost unimaginable. And that design shapes every minute of his daily routine. But food and sleep are only small pieces of life inside ADX Florence. The real struggle is psychological. Because the most powerful weapon inside this prison is not force. It is isolation. Most prisoners at ADX Florence spend around 23 hours a day inside their cells. Sometimes even longer. The schedule rarely changes. After breakfast, hours stretch out in silence. There are no cellmates. No prison yard conversations. No casual interactions with other inmates. Communication with other prisoners is technically prohibited. But human beings adapt. Over time, prisoners develop ways to talk through the walls. Tapping. Whispering through vents. Sliding notes beneath doors when possible. Even these small connections are risky. Because guards monitor everything. If an inmate is caught trying to communicate, privileges can disappear. And in a place already defined by isolation, losing privileges can mean something worse. Even deeper silence. But this is where the reality of ADX Florence becomes more complicated. Because not every prisoner here lives under the same restrictions. Inside the prison exists a quiet hierarchy. Different housing units. Different levels of control. Some prisoners can eventually move to slightly less restrictive environments. But for certain inmates, especially those considered extremely dangerous or influential, the rules become even tighter. And that raises an important question. Where exactly did El Chapo fit into that structure? To understand that, we need to look at how the prison itself operates, and why it was built in the first place. ADX Florence opened in 1994. It was built after a series of violent incidents in other federal prisons. Officials wanted a facility capable of holding the most dangerous inmates in the country: terrorists, espionage agents, organized crime leaders, prison gang commanders, men who could order violence even from behind bars. The goal was simple: total control. Every door in ADX Florence is operated electronically from a remote control room. Guards rarely need to stand directly in front of prisoners. Hallways are segmented by heavy steel gates. Movement is tightly scheduled. One prisoner moves at a time, and each movement requires multiple officers. For someone like El Chapo, this level of security was not optional. It was necessary. His criminal organization once controlled vast trafficking routes across Mexico and into the United States. Even after his arrest, authorities worried about his influence. Could he still communicate with associates? Could he still order violence? Could he still run parts of the cartel from prison? These questions shaped the conditions of his confinement. And the answer was simple: the system would allow almost no opportunity. But controlling a powerful figure inside prison comes with another challenge: reputation. Even behind bars, names carry weight. And El Chapo's name was known everywhere, which created another silent tension inside ADX Florence. Because the prison holds some of the most infamous criminals in the world. And every one of them has a story. Some are terrorists responsible for mass attacks. Others are spies who betrayed their countries. And some are leaders of violent prison gangs. All of them live within the same walls. All of them isolated, but still aware of one another. And that strange coexistence creates an invisible power structure, even when prisoners never meet face to face. What happens next reveals how survival inside ADX Florence is not just about rules. It is about understanding the system, and the consequences of failing to respect it. When an inmate at ADX Florence leaves his cell, it is never casual. Movement is rare, and it is controlled with precision. Before the door opens, guards place the prisoner in restraints: handcuffs, waist chains, leg irons. For high-profile inmates like El Chapo, the process becomes even more strict. Multiple guards supervise every movement. Cameras record everything. Even a short walk down the hallway becomes a carefully monitored operation. Sometimes the destination is a small recreation area. But the word yard would be misleading. Instead of open space, prisoners enter what staff often call a dog run. A narrow concrete enclosure surrounded by high walls. Above, a metal grate allows only a patch of sky. From inside, the outside world feels distant. Exercise time usually lasts about 1 hour. Some prisoners walk in slow circles. Others perform push-ups or sit-ups. For someone used to freedom and movement, this single hour becomes one of the most important parts of the day. But not everyone uses it the same way. Some inmates simply stand there, looking up, watching clouds drift across the small rectangle of sky. Because when the hour ends, they return to the same concrete cell, the same silence, and the same routine. But for El Chapo, exercise time carried a different meaning. Because even within ADX Florence, certain prisoners attract attention. Not admiration. Curiosity. Who is that man? What did he do? And how did he end up here? Inside prison walls, reputation travels faster than conversation. And sometimes that reputation can create danger. But the true challenge of life inside ADX Florence is not physical violence. It is psychological endurance. Because isolation changes people. Slowly, quietly, and often permanently. What happens to prisoners after years inside these cells is something many experts still debate. And El Chapo's story becomes part of that larger question. How long can a person live this way before the silence begins to reshape the mind? The answer is complicated. And what comes next reveals just how carefully this prison manages the men inside it. Lunch arrives the same way breakfast does. Through the slot. Inside the tray are simple portions. Rice, beans, sometimes chicken, sometimes vegetables. The food is basic but consistent. Nutrition matters. But comfort is not part of the equation. For prisoners, meals break the monotony of the day. 3 small markers of time: breakfast, lunch, dinner. Between them stretch long hours where nothing changes. Some prisoners read. Others write letters. Many watch television. Some exercise inside the small space of their cell. Push-ups beside the bed. Sit-ups on the concrete floor. But time moves differently in a place like ADX Florence. Minutes feel longer. Days blur together. Weeks disappear. And months begin to lose meaning. For someone like El Chapo, the contrast with his former life becomes impossible to ignore. He once commanded a global trafficking network. Now his world fits inside a concrete box. And yet, this environment is carefully designed for one purpose: to remove influence, to remove power, to remove control. But there is one thing the system cannot fully eliminate: the human instinct to adapt. And prisoners inside ADX Florence develop their own quiet survival rules. Rules that are rarely written down, but widely understood. And breaking them can make an already difficult life even harder. In the next chapter, those unwritten rules begin to reveal themselves. And what they say about life inside the most secure prison in America is more revealing than most people realize. As evening approaches, the routine continues. Dinner arrives. Another tray. Another quiet exchange through the door slot. Afterward, the lights remain on. Some prisoners read late into the night. Others sit silently, listening to the hum of ventilation systems echoing through the concrete walls. For someone like El Chapo, nights may be the most difficult part of the day. Because when the activity stops, memories return. A life once filled with movement, power, and influence now reduced to silence. But the story of El Chapo inside ADX Florence is not just about isolation. It is about something else. Something far more complicated. Because even the most secure prison in America cannot completely erase the past. And the shadow of El Chapo's former empire still lingers beyond these walls. Which raises a question that prison officials never stop asking. Can a man who once controlled billions truly lose his power? Or does influence survive, even in total isolation? The answer is more unsettling than many people expect. And understanding it reveals the deeper reality of life inside ADX Florence. A place where time moves slowly. But consequences last forever. Inside ADX Florence, time has a strange quality. Days feel long, yet years can vanish without warning. For many inmates, the routine becomes so repetitive that memory begins to blur. Yesterday feels like last week. Last week feels like last year. And for Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán, this slow passage of time carries a heavy weight. Because unlike most prisoners, his past life was built on constant movement. Meetings. Shipments. Secret routes through mountains and deserts. Phones ringing with orders from across continents. But inside ADX Florence, there are no phones. No trusted lieutenants. No cartel meetings. Only the controlled rhythm of a prison designed to cut every connection between a prisoner and the outside world. Yet that design raises a difficult question. If someone once commanded a global criminal network, how do authorities make sure that power truly disappears? The answer lies in a system of surveillance and restrictions unlike anything found in ordinary prisons. And El Chapo's daily life is shaped by those controls in ways few people ever see. Every movement inside ADX Florence is recorded. Hundreds of cameras watch hallways, entrances, and secure corridors. Electronic doors lock and unlock remotely. Motion sensors track activity. The prison operates less like a traditional correctional facility and more like a tightly controlled system of containment. For prisoners considered extremely influential, the monitoring becomes even more intense. El Chapo falls into that category. Authorities feared something very specific: communication. Because in the past, powerful criminal leaders have managed to run operations from behind bars. They used coded messages, corrupt guards, secret phone calls, hidden notes. But ADX Florence was built to prevent exactly that. Prisoners here cannot simply pick up a phone and call someone. Even approved legal calls are tightly supervised. Mail is screened carefully. Every letter is inspected. Every page examined. Anything suspicious is removed. For someone whose empire once relied on communication networks stretching across multiple countries, this silence becomes one of the most dramatic changes of prison life. But communication can take unexpected forms. And prison officials know that influence does not always disappear simply because someone is locked behind concrete walls. Which is why the daily structure of El Chapo's life includes layers of security that go far beyond what most prisoners experience. One of the few remaining connections to the outside world is writing. Prisoners can send and receive letters. But nothing happens quickly. Mail can take weeks to arrive. Sometimes longer. And everything passes through strict inspection. Still, for many inmates, writing becomes essential. Letters help structure time. They create a sense of connection with a world that feels increasingly distant. For El Chapo, communication with family became one of the few remaining emotional lifelines. But even those exchanges were limited. The authorities overseeing his incarceration understood something important. His name still carried enormous influence in parts of the criminal world. Even a few words in the wrong place could potentially send signals to people outside prison. So every piece of correspondence involving him received careful scrutiny. But letters alone cannot fill 23 hours of isolation each day. Which leads to another important part of life inside ADX Florence: mental survival. Because the human mind reacts differently to extreme isolation. And not every prisoner handles it the same way. Over time, prisoners inside ADX Florence develop routines that help them endure the long hours. Some read constantly. Books become one of the most valuable possessions inside a Supermax cell. History, religion, philosophy, fiction. Reading allows the mind to travel beyond concrete walls. Others focus on physical exercise. Hundreds of push-ups. Endless sit-ups. Small circles walked across the narrow floor of the cell. For some inmates, maintaining physical discipline becomes the only way to protect mental stability. But not everyone succeeds. Isolation has psychological effects that experts have studied for decades. Sleep patterns can change. Memory can weaken. Some prisoners begin talking to themselves. Others become deeply withdrawn. A few develop severe anxiety or depression. Prison officials are aware of these risks. But ADX Florence was designed with a clear priority: security above all else. The facility houses men considered too dangerous to be placed in ordinary prison populations. And that reality shapes every decision about daily life inside its walls. For El Chapo, adapting to this environment required a transformation. Because the world he once controlled operated on power and influence. Inside ADX Florence, those tools no longer function. And that change can be difficult for any former crime boss. But El Chapo was not the only powerful figure living in this silent prison. And the presence of other infamous inmates adds another layer to the strange ecosystem inside ADX Florence. Among the prisoners held inside ADX Florence are individuals whose crimes shaped global headlines. Terrorists responsible for deadly attacks. International spies who betrayed their governments. Leaders of violent prison gangs. Each one arrives with a reputation. And even though inmates rarely see each other face to face, those reputations still circulate through the prison. Sometimes through whispers carried through ventilation systems. Sometimes through fragments of conversation overheard during movement. Sometimes through stories told by guards. In this strange environment, prisoners may know the names of men they have never actually seen. A terrorist from overseas. A gang leader from California. A spy who once sold secrets to foreign intelligence agencies. And somewhere within this quiet network of infamous names sits El Chapo. But unlike many other inmates, his story carries a unique dimension. Because his criminal empire once stretched across continents. Billions of dollars. Thousands of people involved in trafficking operations. And even after his arrest and conviction, the organization he built continued to exist in some form. Which makes his presence inside ADX Florence particularly unusual. Because the prison was designed not only to contain individuals, but to sever their influence. And that raises an unsettling question. Can a criminal empire truly lose its leader, when the leader is still alive? The answer is complicated. And understanding it reveals another layer of El Chapo's life inside this prison. Occasionally, inmates inside ADX Florence must leave their cells for administrative reasons. Medical checkups. Legal meetings. Transfers between units. When this happens, the process follows strict procedures. First come the restraints. Hands cuffed. Chains around the waist. Leg irons limiting each step. Multiple guards escort the prisoner. Every door along the route opens and closes electronically. No shortcuts. No unsupervised movement. For high-profile prisoners like El Chapo, these movements attract additional attention. Officials understand that any moment outside the cell creates potential risk. Not necessarily of escape, but of communication. Even a brief encounter with another inmate could carry consequences. Which is why schedules are carefully arranged so that prisoners rarely cross paths. This level of control is exhausting for staff. But it reflects the central philosophy behind ADX Florence. Nothing is left to chance. And that philosophy defines every hour of El Chapo's daily life. But there is one aspect of prison life that no amount of security planning can completely control. Human memory. Because even in total isolation, prisoners carry their past with them. And for someone like El Chapo, that past is impossible to ignore. Before arriving at ADX Florence, El Chapo's name had already become legendary. Not just because of his criminal empire, but because of his escapes. Twice he managed to break out of maximum security prisons in Mexico. The second escape stunned the world. A mile-long tunnel dug beneath his prison cell. Ventilation systems. Electric lighting. A modified motorcycle running along rails. It was one of the most sophisticated prison escapes ever discovered. That history followed him to the United States. And it shaped the conditions of his imprisonment. Authorities were determined that there would never be a third escape. Which is why ADX Florence became the final destination for one of the most famous prisoners in modern history. But even here, the system must constantly adapt. Because prison security is never static. And the presence of inmates with extraordinary criminal histories forces administrators to remain vigilant. Yet despite all these precautions, life inside ADX Florence eventually settles into the same quiet rhythm. Morning lights. Meal trays. Hours of isolation. 1 hour of exercise. More silence. Day after day. Year after year. And for prisoners like El Chapo, the real sentence is not just measured in time. It is measured in distance. Distance from family. Distance from power. Distance from the world they once knew. But perhaps the most difficult part of life inside this prison is something rarely discussed outside its walls. The uncertainty of the future. Because while some inmates eventually leave ADX Florence for less restrictive prisons, others never do. And understanding why reveals the final reality of life inside America's most secure prison. When night falls over the Colorado desert, ADX Florence becomes almost silent. Inside the cells, televisions glow faintly. Some prisoners read. Others lie awake in the darkness. The outside world feels impossibly far away. For Joaquín Guzmán, the man once known as El Chapo, the transformation is complete. The drug lord who commanded billions now lives within a single concrete room. His daily routine controlled minute by minute. His movements restricted. His communications monitored. His influence reduced to memories of a world that continues without him. But the deeper story of ADX Florence is not only about punishment. It is about containment. A system designed to hold the individual's authorities believe cannot be safely managed anywhere else. And for those men, life becomes a slow negotiation with time. Some adapt. Some deteriorate. Some simply endure. But the silence never disappears. And the question that lingers long after the cell doors close each night is simple. What happens to a man when the world he once ruled becomes unreachable? Inside ADX Florence, the answer unfolds slowly. One quiet day at a time. If there's one place on earth where power truly disappears, it's ADX Florence. Inside those silent concrete walls, the man once known as El Chapo lives a life stripped of influence, movement, and control. No cartel meetings. No secret tunnels. Just a small cell, a narrow window to the sky, and the slow passing of time. For some prisoners, the sentence is measured in years. Inside a Supermax prison like this, it's measured in isolation. And the deeper question remains, when a man who once ruled a criminal empire is left alone with nothing but silence, what does that do to the mind? The answer unfolds quietly, day after day, behind doors the world will never see.